Let's talk about open versus closed AI models because that seems like it's the talk of the town right now. And there is some confusion around it. OpenAI is called OpenAI, but ChatGPT is far from an open model. So hopefully we can clear that up and show you what the advantages and disadvantages are of either. So let's talk about closed models first because these are likely what most of us have been using. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, all these big frontier models from these companies, these are closed models. So when you download Claude or ChatGPT, you're not downloading the large language model itself. You're accessing it through an application. Claude is an application or an API. The actual underlying large language model that you're using through those APIs, that's living on the company's own private servers. So every time you ask it a question or give it a document to review, you're sending information to those servers. The company runs the large language model and it sends you an answer back. So at no point do you have access to the model's internal parameters or the files it needs to run independently. You can't inspect how it was trained. You can't download the full system. So you're basically renting access to a room that you're not allowed to enter. Now, for most of us, that's totally fine because there are significant advantages to closed models. Somebody else is buying the hardware. They're responsible for the servers, keeping everything running, handling the updates and the bugs. And for you, all of that might cost like $20 a month, or you might even be using a free model. But keeping in mind that the disadvantages are the company can raise its prices whenever it wants, it can change up the usage limits whenever it wants, it can retire the model that you built your product around, adjust how the model behaves, it can decide that your use case violates its policies. So all of these things you have no control over. And then privacy is another issue. Everything you're submitting is going to their servers, and they might say that they have strong privacy commitments and agreements, but at the end of the day, you're relying on their architecture and hoping that they stick to their word regarding privacy. And for most people, this is a perfectly fine trade off. For my personal use, I only use closed models. I don't need open models, and we'll talk about those next. But just because other people are hyping up open versus closed doesn't mean you need to do things a certain way. It's just about understanding what the pros and cons are of both and figuring out what works for you. And then let's talk about what an open weight model is. So remember, like we've talked about in our previous videos, when these AI models are trained, the model is adjusting billions and trillions of numerical values called weights or parameters. And those values contain what the system has learned from the learning process. Go back and watch our training video to make more sense of that. But for now, just understand that the weights are not the entire model by themselves. A usable model also needs the architecture, configuration files, and inference software, which we'll talk about later. But the weights are the most valuable component because training them requires enormous amounts of data and computing power and money. So an open weight model makes those learned parameters or weights available for download, usually along with the files and the instructions needed to actually run them. Depending on the type of license, the developers of that model might allow you to run the model, modify it, fine-tune it, redistribute it, build products on top of it. But this is just an open weight model. That doesn't automatically mean that it's local. So you can download a model and run it on your computer. You can host it on servers that the company controls, or you can access the exact same open weight model through cloud providers like OpenRouter, Firework, whatever, where you're using their servers. So remember, in that case, even though you have access to the weights, if you're going to use their servers, your prompts are still going to them and the model's running on their hardware. So open weight models just give you the option to host on your own servers or self-host, but it doesn't mean everyone using this type of model is self-hosting. Again, for most layman people, not usually many indications to even bother with this, unless you have a clear use case, in which case you're probably not watching this video to begin with. Now, open weight doesn't necessarily mean open source. The traditional definition of open source meant you receive the source code and the legal permission to inspect it, modify it, use it, and redistribute it, whereas the AI open weight or open source definition is a bit different and still being worked on. The Open Source Initiative published a definition where an open source AI system should provide access to its model parameters, the code used to train and run it, information about its training data, and it should give users the legal freedom to study it, use it, modify it, and share the system without restriction. And a lot of these models out there don't necessarily meet that definition. So you can think of an open weight model like being given a finished cake. You can eat it, slice it, decorate it, study parts of it, or even sell servings of it, but you may not receive the full recipe and the exact ingredient list or access to the kitchen where it was made, so to speak. And these open weight models still come with a license, and that license is going to determine what you're legally allowed to do with the files. So you have to be careful, and even though a company is saying that their model is open, you need to consider which aspect of it is open and what you can do with that license. Is it the weights that are open, the inference code, the training code, the data set? Which part is it? So the primary advantage with these open weight models is you have the option to self-host on your own servers, which means your data is not being sent out to these other bigger companies to run on their servers. You're running it yourself. And for the individuals who are into coding and AI and want to play around with the models, they have access to looking at the inside of that model and modifying it and working with it to best serve their function. And when it comes to performance, generally the closed models are better than the open weight models, but now it's becoming closer and closer and closer, which is why this is such a hot topic of discussion, because things like Kimi from China, it's a model which is open weight, and at many benchmarks, it's showing that it's just as good as the frontier models at a fraction of the price. For most people, the most average user, the day-to-day user, open weight models are going to get the job done just fine. And the reason that these are becoming more and more popular is because for most people's use, you don't need the smartest model on earth. It just needs to do a task or a job for you, do it properly, do it quickly and cheaply. And when it comes to businesses using AI, that's all they want. They don't care about having the best model ever if it's going to cost them way more than using an open weight model that can do the same job for them at the fraction of the price. And that's what a lot of it comes down to, is the money. Especially if it's an enterprise or a business deciding which model they want to use. Some of these open weight models access through those hosted providers where, sure, you're still using someone else's server, but you're using these open weight models per token. They can be 60, 80, even 90% cheaper in certain cases for the exact same task that the closed model would be doing for you. So generally, regardless of benchmark scores and what the smartest, most advanced model is, it just depends on the task that you need done. If you're just classifying support tickets or extracting information in a standardized way, very repetitive, simple tasks, an open weight model might be more than good enough and likely is for you. Whereas if you're dealing with an unusually long engineering problem or you're trying to code a massive project, then it might make sense to use the frontier closed models, for now at least. So again, with the open weight models, the first advantage is really control. If you self-host, then you're choosing when you're going to update it. No one can just get rid of it without asking you. You can test a new version before you actually deploy it. You can fine tune it for your particular domain. The other thing is going to be portability. You have options whether you want to use it on your own hardware, your own chips, a private cloud, or different providers. So you're less dependent on just one company's API. You have that control. And then when it comes to control over your own data and privacy, if you're running the model on your own hardware and you turn off any sort of cloud integrations, those prompts are remaining on your device or within your organization. So you have control over all of that, which obviously means a lot when you're dealing with confidential documents or regulated information or things that you don't want shared. And then like we alluded to earlier, cost flexibility is another big one. Of course, depending on self-hosting, you might have to pay for hardware and electricity, cloud servers, engineering, all that stuff. But in the long run, depending on your usage, open weight models might make sense. However, if you're an average user and you have a low volume day-to-day use, a hosted closed model might actually be a lot cheaper. And then as far as disadvantages, obviously common sense, right? So when your API or Claude or ChatGPT breaks down, you just contact the company, hey, it's not working properly, fix it. When your own hosted API fails, that's your job. You're responsible for the hardware, the updates, dealing with bugs. Depending on how it's set up, people can have virus concerns, code bugs. So it all really comes down to what your level of comfort is with this stuff and what makes sense for your own use case. So you have to be very careful and make sure you know what you're doing if you're going to use one of these open weight local models that have access to your emails and your documents and your terminal. You're still exposing yourself to privacy concerns as well as damaging hacks and all that stuff. So it really depends on the individual. So basically the bottom line when it comes to deciding whether you want to use a closed frontier model or these open models coming out, again, it just depends on your own use and what you're comfortable with and what your priorities are. For me personally, as the average user of AI, I don't have any complex tasks that I need to do. I don't want to worry about the headache of hardware and privacy and all this other upkeep. So I just use a simple Claude or OpenAI ChatGPT subscription every month, and it takes care of what I need. If you have higher needs, higher usage, privacy is a big concern for you, then the open weights might make sense. But the bottom line is you should use whatever makes the most sense in your own situation, depending on your tasks and your volume of use, not just whatever is popular. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Be sure to check out the newsletter and the community in the description. We're working on some cool stuff there. Everything is free. Let us know what you want to hear about next, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.